And we are on.
Hey, Guru Nation. Welcome back to the Clinical Trials Guru.com. We're doing the video interview a little differently today. I'm in the car, and so we're doing an audio-only interview. But I've got Darshan Kulkarni, and I've got Chris Sauber on the line. And if you watch regularly, you know them both very well. But if you don't, I'll let each of them introduce themselves. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Introduce myself. Well, I'm one of Dan's business partners. We focus on a number of different things. We offer consulting services as well as we're just starting our own CRO.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. And then, that will be sufficient, Chris. And then we got Darshan Kulkarni, and Darshan is a legend on the show. He's an attorney. Yes, a legend. He's an attorney and a pharmacist. Okay, so there's probably only like a dozen people like that in this country. Maybe more, but I might be exaggerating a little.
Probably more than that. Yeah.
Right, but there's definitely only a handful in our industry, the clinical research industry, if
That's
that
true.
many. Okay, so you might be the only one. So, anyways, Darshan brings really interesting perspective. That's right. So Darshan brings interesting perspective. We're going to be talking about regulatory pathways today for medical device companies and for biotech companies. Just talk about some of the similarities and differences and some of the nuances, because a lot of our audience members are biotech companies or medical device companies that have actually never gone through the clinical trial process. So Darshan, first of all, where can people find you? Let people know what you would prefer.
So you can always reach me on my website at kulkarnilawfirm.com. You could also find me by Twitter, which is how I actually met Dan, and that's FDA Lawyers, at FDA Lawyers, or you can just do at Kulkarni Law Firm. Either one, you can reach me. It'll be great. I would love to talk to you. I'd love to hear about what your questions are and how I can help you. Or if you're in the Philly area, I can just meet up with you.
Yeah, we were Twitter BFFs. I do remember now. This was a while ago when Twitter was really heavily utilized. It's not so much the case anymore. Now I use Twitter to get my news, and that's about it. Unfortunately,
it's great for news, though. I love Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even watch TV anymore. I just look at Twitter. So thank you both for being on, and we're going to try to keep this short. So, Darshan, why don't we start talking about the differences from a regulatory perspective of a new drug going through the clinical trial process versus a medical device or an assay?
So we can actually discuss it in three different ways. There's a new drug, and when we talk new drug, most people are thinking of small molecules. You're thinking of your aspirin, you're thinking of your ibuprofen, you're thinking of your diabetes tablets. However, on the other hand, what a lot of people aren't considering are things like biologics. And while some of them, in the case of biologics, are still aiming to file an NDA, in other cases, you're kind of file what's called a BLA, a biologics licensing application. It lands up using a lot of similar methodology, but some people don't even realize that they aren't regulated by the same entity, which is small molecules are regulated by what's called CDER, Center for Drugs, while large molecules, biologics, are regulated by CBER, which is Center for Biologics. And why does that matter? That matters because there are a whole different set of rules and laws that kick in, a whole different set of expectations. And in some cases, and here's what surprises a lot of people, there are some ways to get biologics and bring them legally onto the market without ever going through FDA approval. Similarly, the medical device world has similar capability. You have what's called a PMA. It's your full-blown, you need to go get your application done. You need to prove the FDA that that your device meets all the standards that they expect. But then there are ways of saying, well, my device is very similar to another device out there. Why do I need to go through full-blown clinical trials? Why do I need to demonstrate all these things? Maybe I can just refer back to that device. In those cases, that might be what you refer to as a 510K. A 510K is not always appropriate, but when it is appropriate, it can be great. Then there are situations where you can actually go, this thing is so normal, so banal, so non-harmful, that the FDA simply says, please don't bother me with this stuff. Just come onto the market and let us know that that's what you're doing. Those things are often called what are called 510K exempt. Diagnostic products, in many cases, qualify as medical devices, and that's something you need to consider. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, this is a drug, this is a device, this is a biologic. You need to, and we need to do just all the appropriate clinical trials. What you need to be thinking of is, when is the right clinical trial required? What process do we need to use? When is that process appropriate? And that's the type of analysis that requires understanding what your process is. As you may have heard, yesterday's news was CEO of 23andMe. Dan, Chris, have you guys heard of the 23andMe scenario about what happened there?
I have not.
Yeah, so I've actually used the service, so I'm somewhat familiar with it. So they never got FDA approved to make certain claims, and I believe that's what the issue revolves around, as far as looking at your biomarker and your genotype.
Essentially what they were doing, it's very similar to what you're saying, Dan. Essentially what they were doing was they were just looking at your DNA and saying, you have a 60% chance of getting X. Like, it could be cancer, it could be diabetes, whatever. And then the FDA came out and said, well, what makes you say that? And they didn't quite have any evidence. They were pointing to scientific publications, but the argument is, how does that apply to your study itself? How accurate is your study compared to that scientific information? And they'd never validated those results. And that became a problem, and they had to go back to the FDA and get a lot of information. In fact, yesterday's news was that they were getting rid of a lot of things that they'd planned. And the CEO came out yesterday and said that turns out Silicon Valley is not looking at the FDA the way they were supposed to. They simply don't understand the FDA. And Dan will put this in the show notes so you can read this article. It came from the Wall Street Journal, I believe. And that could be really interesting. Silicon Valley simply goes, we didn't think of it this way. That's the same problem that you had with Theranos, which was a huge debacle that happened in the last year or so. Dan, Chris, do you guys remember Theranos?
Of course, yeah. So the question, I guess, would be, why would someone like Theranos not seek FDA approval for their devices and their tests that they are selling?
So here's what happened. The FDA has been accused of a lot of things. Depending on who you are, you accuse the FDA for different things. If you're a drug company, you come out and say, FDA, you're incredibly onerous, you cost so much money, you're a huge problem. And then if you're a consumer, if you're a patient, you go, I want safety, I want efficacy, I want proof, and I want access to clinical results. And I want it now, and I want it cheap. Here's the problem. If you go down the pathway of saying, I want it now, I want it cheap, it means you can't have as many clinical trials, and you're going to have to come to market quicker. If you're saying that it's too expensive, that's the process you have to use. So if you're using full-blown clinical trials, by definition, that's not going to happen. Now, the FDA tries not to get in the middle of the relationship between physicians and their patients. So if a single physician is doing something for his or her single patient or his or her patients on a small, limited basis, the idea is the FDA doesn't want to interfere with that. So what happened was that the FDA created this this regulatory scheme, and they said you need to go through this entire approval process for all these different diagnostics. However, if you're just doing this for one hospital or just a single place where you're doing things for your patients, we aren't going to come regulate what you're doing. That's silly. There are thousands of hospitals across the country, and I'm not going to go to every hospital and look at what you're doing. If you're doing more than that, you need to come talk to us. Well, people took that concept and ran with it. Go ahead.
I see. I was just going to ask, what if you take that to mean that I can do this with one hospital system, and that's like 100 hospitals?
Well, if you did it at 100 hospitals, that could become problematic because it's not a single location anymore. And the FDA hasn't really gone down that path in any significant way. I'd have to look at those details closer. How are you doing it at 100 different hospitals? Are they spread all over the country? There's a concept that that are known as central labs, and it all depends on how the definition of the word central labs is used. And we'd have to look at that a little bit closer. But essentially what it comes down to is if you have a central lab, if you're doing it in one location or one primary area, the FDA says we aren't going to interfere. So a lot of these large companies came out and said, why don't we just do our studies and we'll do them through a single individual central lab, and then we can just come to market quicker. And that's where a lot of companies failed. They tried to come to market quicker, but they started offering their products across the country. And they were claiming exemptions that they simply weren't eligible for. And that's where you're getting multi-billion-dollar losses, like in the case of Theranos. You had a situation where the person who owned it went from being worth $4 billion, being the youngest female billionaire, to being worth zero the next year.
Correct.
So these are things we need to be aware of.
So and we'll have to do a part 2 and a part 3, and I want to get the video side by side so we can have a more entertaining dialogue. But I wanted to end it with how does a company know, let's say it's medical device or a biotech or a group developing an assay, how do they know which pathway they need to go down? Or is there always one pathway that they need to choose, or are they allowed to do pretty much whatever they want as long as they're not marketing it a certain way? Can you kind of give us just a broad overview of that?
And before you do, Darshan, if we can add just a little bit more detail to that question that I'm curious about. Does the FDA give guidance? Does the FDA give guidance on which path to pursue?
So the FDA tries to give guidance using its guidance documents. It tries to give guidance using its regulations. The FDA even allows you to have what are called pre-IND meetings, if you will, or in certain cases even pre-IDE meetings for drugs and devices and biologics. And they say, come talk to us, let us guide you. However, the FDA is not in the business of telling you what is your optimal regulatory strategy. The FDA is trying to protect patients' lives. So to be blunt, you need to talk to someone like me. You need to talk to me and find out what is the optimal strategy for you. Sometimes I've had tons of clients who came in there saying, we need to do a PMA, this is going to be your 15-year process, blah, blah, blah. And then I look at the data, I look at what they're trying to achieve, and I go, are you sure? Because you might be able to get into the market really quickly. And they were surprised by that in a good way. In other cases, I've had clients saying, we definitely qualify for these different statuses. We want to get into the market immediately. And we go, well, tell me more about why you think that. And then they find out that what they thought was accurate simply didn't apply. And those are the types of questions you need to have people who know how to read these regs, know how to read the laws, know how to read the guidances, and they need to help guide you. So there are some processes, there are some SOPs, there are some MAPs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But how do they apply to you is the question that you have to answer.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. And that just gives the audience, an overview of the importance of regulatory, because Chris and I are experts in operations and in in recruiting patients and in finding sites and then making sure the sites are FDA compliant and following GCP and the protocol. But then there's a whole other aspect to it, which is where we bring in someone like Darshan, who can help lead us down the right path as far as regulatory is concerned. So we're definitely going to have a part 2 and maybe a part 3 as we evolve our own CRO services, and we look forward to having you back on, Darshan.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, sir, and Chris as well. Thank you also. Do you have any other questions, Chris?
No, we can save those for part 2.
Part 2, part 3, part 4. Who knows how many there will be? An infinite amount. Okay. So
that's right.
We need to keep the viewers coming. We need to keep them coming back. All right. Thank you, guys. I got a jet. Chris, make sure you hit the record button, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. Thank you, Darshan. Talk to you later, Dan.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Darshan.